I'm Rachel Bell, and this is Your Last Meal, the show where celebrities share stories about the foods they love most, and we dig into the history, culture, and science of those meals with experts from around the world. Today on the program, Kathleen Hanna, punk rock singer, feminist activist, and frontwoman for La Tigra and Bikini Kill. Kathleen just released her brand new memoir. It's called Rebel Girl. The book starts with her chaotic childhood, moves into her college years in Olympia, Washington, where she sang in punk bands, hung out with Kurt Cobain, helped coin the term girl power, and eventually became the epicenter for the Riot Girl movement. Oh, and she eventually married Ad Rock from the Beastie Boys. Also, I love her. When I think of food and feminism, I think of the cookbook Rage Baking, the transformative power of flour, fury, and women's voices.
The idea of using sugar and spice, but you don't have to be nice.
That is coming up later in the show. But first, my conversation with Kathleen Hanna. Just to start, I loved your book. From the first sentence, I couldn't put it down. But I also just want to say, because you talk about your life, so many traumatic things that happen, I just want to say that I'm very sorry that all that happened to you.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's so sweet. It's nice to hear, you know?
At the very beginning of the book, you say, I don't feel like a rebel girl. Most of the time, I feel like a dirty napkin. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think a lot of performers come to art, come to making music damaged. I mean, we're all damaged in some way, right? Like, yeah. We all have capital T trauma, little t trauma, and everything in between. But I do think that, you know, in the beginning, I definitely came to performing looking for love in all the wrong places, as they say. And from, you know, growing up in a very dysfunctional household with an alcoholic father and then being a very outspoken feminist, I definitely took my share of belittling and dehumanization kind of chronically, and also experienced, you know, sexual violence, which just furthers that feeling that you're just a piece of trash, you know, you're a dirty napkin. So I think the contrast between feeling like a dirty napkin and people thinking I'm a rebel girl, or that, you know, I'm a totally empowered, angry, you know, in charge person, when in reality I am that. I could also be very insecure,
right?
Feel like an imposter, be constantly triggered when I'm sexually harassed to even worse situations, and have to grapple with those and feel really angry that I could be making more work instead of being in therapy 2 days a week, dealing with stuff that has nothing to do with me that other people did to me. So, you know, I kind of had to realize I'm both. I'm a dirty napkin and I'm a rebel girl, but Rebel Girl is definitely a better title for a book.
I want to talk about sushi. You cried the first time that you ever ate sushi?
Yes, I did. My boyfriend at the time, when I was 30, who is now my husband, he took me to get sushi at Japanica in New York, in Manhattan. You know, I had no idea. I mean, I didn't even know what it was. I tasted it, and he got me the specific thing that he really liked, and it was a salmon, avocado, and mayonnaise, like American mayonnaise, with rice hand roll. Because he thought it would be a good way to like introduce me. I love spices, and I love the ritual of like mixing the wasabi and the way you mix it with the soy sauce. And then I ate it, and I was like, yeah, I just was overcome with emotion because it was so delicious. And we don't really have like a song, you know how people have songs. Like, yeah, I dated somebody once that our song was Moni Moni. Which is not very romantic, but we have a sushi roll, like instead of a song. And yeah, and so it always kind of brings me back to the first time. But I'm a real crier when I get good food.
I was going to ask about that because in the prologue of your book, on the very first page of the book, you say that you cried eating gelato in Italy when you were with your band.
When I'm feeling present in the moment and I eat something delicious, I feel overcome. You know what it actually reminds me of is I get really into movies. It was a long time ago. I watched that movie Perfect Storm. Marky Mark is in it. This huge storm comes and it's like going to like topple over this boat. And I was watching it in the theater. I felt like I was on the boat. Like I was terrified. I was like hiding from the wave. Like I get very overcome by things. And so with food, it almost feels like, I'm watching the perfect storm and the wave is going to hit me, but it's a good wave.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that. Do people like eating with you because of that? Because I feel like when you're with someone in any situation and they're just so into it, whether it's crying or laughing, I like being around people who are highly emotional about things like that.
I have always found it slightly embarrassing, even though I know I shouldn't. And I tell my kid crying is really therapeutic, but he hates it when I cry because no one wants to see their mom cry.
Yeah, that's true.
I had a thing where I quit sugar for like a year for health reasons. The only sugar I had was in blueberries. That was it. And that wasn't frequent. And then my cousin, who I'm very close with, Jane, it was her birthday and she was in New York where we lived. And so we had a party for her and her friend Ray made a homemade birthday cake and it looked incredible. And I hadn't eaten sugar in a year. You kind of have to have a piece of birthday cake when someone brings a homemade birthday cake to your house. And we're at this big, long table and it's like all these amazing women are there. And I was just like, I should have a bite of birthday cake. So I take one bite of this birthday cake and I start it wasn't just crying. It was like, I don't know if you've ever seen those babies on like TikTok who are cry laughing.
No.
I was laughing and crying. I was hysterically crying. I was hysterically crying so loud that I couldn't stop because I was laugh crying. I was so happy that I was I was in the sugar loop.
Yeah.
So not only was it completely delicious, which was overwhelming and made me cry, it was also, I hadn't had sugar in a year and there's I just had a massive dose of sugar.
Yeah.
So the crying and the laughing were in this never ending loop that I couldn't get out of. And stuff's coming out of my nose and the whole thing. And of course, my cousin, who is a jerk, my favorite jerk, who I love, she's my jerk. She took out her phone and took a ton of pictures.
Good.
And then put them all over Facebook just to humiliate me. So I haven't documented that the first time I ate sugar, I absolutely lost my mind. But now I eat it more often and it's not a big deal.
They're going to have to put your picture in cake shops behind the register. Like when you would write a bag check in the pictures, they'd be like, do not sell cake.
Yeah.
And then she will lose it.
She's 86.
Totally. If she touches the frosting, it goes into her blood system. I'm sure it is a little bit insane to witness in person, but I find the idea of crying over food extremely endearing. And admittedly, I'm also a little envious that she's able to feel this deeply and emotionally when something tastes good. The good news is she always has some salty tears around if her food needs seasoning. All right, after the break, don't call me honey cakes. Catherine's not taking any more sheet cake. Impeachment upside down cake. What happens when a feminist turns on her oven? When I think of the connection between punk rock and food, I think of Food Not Bombs. I think of veganism. I'll never forget the first time I went dumpster diving was the day that Barack Obama was inaugurated. I went out and we went dumpster diving with Food Not Bombs. I was curious about you, past or present, if there's any connection between being punk and food. And also, the other place where you lie with feminism and food, because again, a lot of complicated things there too about women being in the kitchen, women wanting to be in the kitchen, all of that.
I connect food with a part of punk that is radical in that it thinks everybody should be free. And I think a part of punk is self-care. I have not gotten to the place with food where I'm at a self-care location yet. I am still drawing the map to get there. I do not cook. I'm a horrible cook. My husband does most of the cooking and he's quite good at it. And my son also loves to cook. So I'm very fortunate that I live with people who want to make sorbet out of fresh lemons and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I really benefit from that. I do love the community of food. Actually, all yesterday I was eating leftovers from my friend Dusty Lombardo, who's a photographer. we had just a little birthday get together over here, and she knew I was busy. I've been really busy with the book and press and preparing for also a tour with Bikini Kill. So she went to this place called Gracias Madre and bought all this food, and it was all vegan Mexican food, absolutely delicious, like portobello mushrooms in like a homemade corn tortilla, cilantro sauce on everything, these like pupusas with squash in them.
Oh, the squash blossoms, the Loroco. I love that. Yeah, that's good.
Squash blossoms, that's what they're called. And then they had like a mushroom sauce on them.
Oh my God.
It was so good. So she brought all this amazing food, and we set it out, and we had a bunch of people over and eating outside, and the kids are playing on the trampoline. And it was just like one of those things that like the food was so delicious that it just made the day even that much better. And it felt like a celebration. Everybody enjoying the food together was really special and really beautiful. And then yesterday, I basically just ate leftovers all day. And then I realized we still had so much. And so I packed up this kind of like perfect little Tupperwares of it. My mom lives 5 minutes away. So I was absolutely exhausted. And I was like, you know what? This food is so delicious. I cannot have it go to waste. Like, I literally am going to stay awake tonight knowing it's in there and it's not being eaten. So I packed it up and I went down, and my mom didn't have any dinner planned. Luckily, she didn't have something like defrosting or whatever moms do, but I gave her this food and she was just like, oh, this is so awesome. Like, and it was just this really kind of cool thing that like through food, it made me go over there. I wanted my mom to taste it.
Yeah.
Like, I wanted to share it. It's like when you hear like a great song and you're like, you want to call your best friend and be like, oh my God, have you heard of this band? Or like you read a book and you want to tell everybody about it. And so it was kind of that feeling of like, this food is so yummy. I have to share it with my mom.
Kathleen Hanna has always been outspoken. In her early performing days, she talked about domestic violence and sexual abuse between songs. In her memoir, she says men would yell, "Just shut up and play," while women would approach her after the shows to confess the terrible things that happened to them. Kathleen brought all of her rage to the stage. But when cookbook author and James Beard Award-winning journalist Kathy Gunst got mad, she was surprised to find herself in the kitchen.
So rage baking began in late fall of 2018 when Brett Kavanaugh was being grilled about his behavior in high school with Dr. Blasey Ford and whether or not he should be placed on the Supreme Court. And I spent long hours listening to the hearings over the radio, and I found myself by the end of the day so enraged. I so believed her and so understood that she was risking everything to tell her truth so that we wouldn't get this man on the Supreme Court who clearly was lying. Every night, to kind of calm myself down, I started to bake and bake and bake. And I am way more of a savory cook, so it was surprising to me that I was choosing to make a cake and a tart and flan. And I was kind of curious about this. This happened for about 4 or 5 days in a row as the hearings went on. And slowly it occurred to me that baking is in fact very scientific and very grounding because it is a formula. And if you follow it for the most part, it will pay you off with something sweet and delicious. And I think the idea of normalcy and following a rule and having a payoff felt really important during that time when everything that I was hearing and witnessing on the news was about these men in power breaking all the laws and getting away with all of it, which brings us so much to the current time.
It also sounds like it was giving you a bit of a mental break because you were reading a lot, watching a lot. You were just really immersed in this story that was really upsetting you.
Yeah, I definitely think it had a calming element. And it wasn't so much about eating it or wanting to rage eat. It was about wanting to go through this process and be rewarded with a perfectly cooked cake or perfectly crisp cookies or a silky pudding. That was the reward.
Kathy started posting her bakes with the hashtag #RageBakers.
And getting all kinds of response from women all over the country who were like, Right On, Me Too. It turned out that it really is an offshoot of something that's been going on for a long time. It happened quite a bit during the civil rights movement, where women had kitchens where they would bake and raise funds to help Martin Luther King, to help the movement. There is a long history of women in the kitchen baking to either support elections or to support a rebellion of sorts.
Eventually, this translated into a book, Rage Baking: The Transformative Power of Flour, Fury, and Women's Voices. There are recipes from chefs, bakers, and cookbook authors like Carla Hall and Dory Greenspan, an interview with singer Ani DeFranco, an essay from culinary historian Jessica B. Harris. All in all, 40 women contributed to the book, including Kathy and her co-author, Catherine Alford.
A friend, Mindy Fox, has a delicious granola with apricots and cardamom, and she tells the story of being at the University of Wisconsin as a young college student and making the granola and bringing it to the rallies and helping people sustain themselves and fight war and opposing political voices. And then for sheer pleasure, the tahini chocolate chip cookies, tahini being very popular in a lot of Middle Eastern food, might be a really nice cookie to make. Hope for peace in the Mideast and hope for this conflict, which is a war, to cease. And these tahini chocolate chip cookies I've probably made 100 times. I can't get enough of them.
A good chunk of the recipes don't have a political or feminist message attached, but all of the recipes look delicious. I want to make the chocolate banana pudding pie with salted peanuts and the lemon cream cheese pound cake. And of course, as a punster, I love the impeachment upside down cake for the pun alone. This book is an interesting dichotomy. It's a cookbook about feminist women who are going into the kitchen to blow off steam.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. It's these opposing forces. It's like the last thing women want is to go back to that role of being stuck in the kitchen, cooking all day for the families, cooking for the man. It's not what it's about. It's really about finding a kind of peaceful, grounding way to refocus and reset the onslaught of what is going on in our country and in our world.
And if you're thinking, how will baking chocolate cherry biscotti make the world a kinder, more just place? Kathy lays it out in the book's introduction.
Did the baking stop the rage? Hell no. Did the baking make all the lies and deceit and behind-the-scenes dealings feel less menacing? Not one bit. But let's be clear. The message behind this book is not telling women that if they get back into the kitchen and start baking, their rage will be sedated and all will be well. Far from it. This is a book about women's voices, women's recipes, women in community with one another. Don't let anyone tell you you're being too dramatic, too loud, too outspoken. Speak out. Speak up. Whether you march, make a donation, large or small, work for a candidate you believe in, or join a local organization fighting for something that speaks to you, stay informed and involved.
After the break, a very unexpected and very charming last meal choice from Kathleen Hanna.
I have to ask you the question that we ask all the guests on the show, which is, what would your last meal be?
I probably should have thought of this in advance, huh?
Yeah, no.
I actually kind of know what it is. So there's this place called the something brewery. I don't remember what it is. It's like some bad chain restaurant brewery place that is like in Times Square.
Okay.
And they probably have like one in Cleveland and, various places around the country. It's called like Heartland Brewery or something like that.
Okay.
I don't know if they still exist. So they had this appetizer that they probably called appetizers because it's that kind of jam.
A lot of flair on the uniforms.
Yeah. But me and a bunch of friends went there and I ordered this thing, buffalo chicken egg rolls with blue cheese dip. And I think probably I would have a burrito that was like that. Like I would have one that was like the size of a meatloaf or the size of a burrito with the blue cheese all over it.
For her last meal, Kathleen Hanna wants a giant buffalo chicken egg roll with blue cheese dip from Heartland Brewery in Times Square. Heartland closed in March 2020, actually before the pandemic started. And even though Kathleen got the feeling it was a national chain, it was actually a locally owned New York City brewery that at one time had 7 locations around the city. Fortunately for Kathleen, she has a backup plan.
Or if I was vegetarian, which I'm hoping to be by the time of my death, I would probably just eat my body weight in Schneider's of Hanover buffalo hot wings pretzels. Because
I've never heard of those.
They're so delicious. Like, I feel like now I really have to go eat like 100 of them, but I'm not going to. They're terrible for you. They have everything awful in them, and they are so good.
I got excited because that's my favorite brand. And when I was a kid, my family toured the factory. Like, we flew from California back east and toured a pretzel factory. I've never.
Wait, did you do mustard on your pretzels?
When they're hard ones, I just eat them plain, but the soft ones, yeah.
Because we did, when I was a kid, we used to get from, not Pepperidge Farm, but it's this other mail order catalog where you get like sausages and.
Oh, I know what I'm talking about. Yes. It's something farm. Oh God, they had it in the mall. And
yeah, they had it at the mall. I remember when they got it at the mall and I was like, oh, you can go to the mall and get it. Back then you couldn't get, like, I grew up in the 70s. So it's like, we didn't have fancy mustard at the store.
Oh,
like those little pots of like sweet hot mustard, like none of that business. They didn't even have ramen. Like we had to go to a specialty store to get ramen. So we got
Hickory Farms.
So we used to get every year at Christmas, Hickory Farms had like a pack where they would send you like 5 different flavors of mustard. And then we would get bags of pretzels and like do taste tests on them. And it's one of my happiest family memories is like trying all the different mustards. And also at Sears, the store we went to most often, because we got a discount there because my grandma worked there. So Sears always sold those soft pretzels like they sell at baseball games, you know, with the salt. Yeah. And I remember walking into Sears and smelling that smell and just being like, my mom would be like, do you want to get a piece of candy at the counter or a pretzel? And I was always like, pretzel. And then I would put mustard on it. And it was just like heaven to me. I'm a salty person.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm a savory type of person.
I read that you do these taste tests now with your kid. Is that because of the mustard tasting when you were little?
Yeah. And my mom was really into this cola called RC Cola.
Yeah.
And she drank a lot of RC Cola. And so we would do taste tests. And I mean, this was kind of a thing. I think there was a commercial in the 70s that was, they would taste test Pepsi, RC, and Coke. And then they would be like, oh, Coke wins. Yeah, maybe it was Pepsi, the Pepsi challenge.
Yeah.
And Pepsi would always win. And so we just started mimicking that at my house. So like we would do, my mom would put out those 3 colas and blindfold us. And we would all blindfold each other. And
so
I mean, it sounds kind of sexual, but it wasn't blindfold part. But it was more just like, you know, it was just like a fun thing to do. And then we did it with like blueberry sodas with my kid. We did it with root beers. Yeah, just like fun with taste tests. We have this store out in California called Gelco's, and they have like all of the old candy bars and all of the old sodas. So my husband actually just bought my mom an RC that I'm going to bring her later today.
Oh my God, that's awesome. Okay, going back to your baby size egg roll filled with buffalo chicken, did you have this once or have you had it many times?
Oh no, then I went back.
Okay.
Like I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then I was like, found myself on the subway getting off at Times Square to go to Heartland Brewery by myself. And I was just like watching the movie of myself doing it in my head going, no, don't go in there. But I was like, I couldn't help it, you know?
And that was Kathleen Hanna's last meal.
Well, we are out of time. I could talk to you all day, but thank you so much for your time. And it was an honor to speak with you. I know that sounds dramatic, but I've been a fan of your music for so long, and even more just a fan of you. So getting to read the book and learn a bit about your life, it was just super interesting and beautiful. And thanks for writing the book.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Make sure and pick up a copy of Kathleen's new book, Rebel Girl. It is very good, it is very candid, and if you were into grunge or punk rock in the early 90s, it is a very interesting behind-the-scenes look of what really was going on. And you can hear Kathleen talk about the book in person. She has several stops left on her book tour, and if you're lucky, she'll be in your city. And after the tour, she takes off with Bikini Kill for their big summer tour. You can find links to all of this in the show notes. Your Last Meal is a product of Seattle's Cascade PBS. This episode was produced with Isaac Kaplan-Woolner, who also mixed and mastered it. And I created, hosted, and co-produced the podcast. Original theme music by Prom Queen. Oh, and next week, we will be back with an episode of The Leftovers, featuring more of my interview with Kathleen Hanna. She will talk about her huge accidental contribution to Nirvana, something that producer Isaac said everybody already knows about, but I never heard it before, so I think there's a good chance a lot of you didn't know this either. She also talks about what it was like working at McDonald's as a teenager, and I interviewed the co-founder of Food Not Bombs. Subscribe to Your Last Meal in your podcast app so you never miss an episode. Find a link in the show notes to sign up for my free newsletter. It's rachelbell.substack.com. And I'm on Instagram at Hello Rachel Bell. I'm Rachel Bell, and this is Your Last Meal.
Or a silky pudding. That was the reward.
Yeah, you were, sorry, I'm having a froggy throated morning. Hold on, I'm going to put myself on mute and my clear throat.
Go ahead.
Okay, now I'm as silky smooth as a chocolate pie. Okay. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you think is important or that you just want to point out about the book, about the movement, about baking in a ragey state?
I love that you asked me that because I just taught my students that today, that should always be their last question.
Yes. I was taught that 22 years ago when I started my journalism career.
Yay. It's so good because people will reflect, mostly when they hang up,